April 10, 1815. The world was forever changed by a sound so loud it echoed over 1,600 miles away. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't war, it was the earth itself tearing apart. On the remote Indonesian island of Sumbawa, a volcano that had been quiet for over 1,000 years erupted with such fury that it instantly became the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history. Mount Tambora exploded with a violence no living person had ever witnessed. And what followed was a global disaster so devastating, so surreal that it altered weather patterns, economies and cultures across continents, and yet today, barely anyone talks about it. It began slowly. On April 5th, 5 days before the main event, minor explosions and smoke began to rise from Tambora's crater. Locals weren't alarmed. Tremors were common in the archipelago, but what they didn't realize was that the magma chamber beneath the mountain had been pressurized for centuries. And now, that pressure was seeking release. What came next was beyond anything anyone could have predicted. On April 10th, just after sunset, the mountain unleashed hell. The eruption generated a sound so loud it was heard in Sumatra over 1,600 kilometers away. Eyewitnesses described a sky set ablaze, ash and pumice rained down in sheets, villages were incinerated instantly by pyroclastic flows that raced down the mountainside at hundreds of kilometers per hour. At least 12,000 people died within minutes. But that was just the beginning. What made Tambora so uniquely catastrophic wasn't just the death toll in Indonesia, it was what happened to the sky. The eruption sent over 36 cubic miles of ash, sulfur dioxide and rock particles into the upper atmosphere, an enormous plume that reached the stratosphere. That ash didn't fall back to Earth. It stayed. It wrapped around the planet, forming a light-blocking veil that dimmed the sun and dramatically lowered global temperatures. Within months, the entire northern hemisphere began to experience a strange, unfamiliar chill. It was the start of something later dubbed the year without a summer. By 1816, farmers from Vermont to Vienna found themselves staring at dead crops, frozen soil and snow in the middle of June. In North America, snow fell in upstate New York on June 6th. In Quebec, the St. Lawrence River froze over in July. Crops failed across the eastern US and Canada. People began to starve. In Europe, torrential rain and a lack of sunlight devastated agriculture. Germany and Switzerland faced food riots. Ireland suffered through one of its worst famines. Grain prices spiked tenfold. Entire families were forced to sell everything they owned for a sack of flour. It wasn't just hunger, it was chaos. Crime rose, governments cracked down. In some regions, people blamed witches, divine punishment, or foreign conspiracies. No one knew the true cause. They couldn't have. The eruption had taken place in a distant part of the world, and the concept of global climate linkage didn't exist yet. The official death toll from the eruption itself was around 71,000, but that number doesn't reflect the true cost. Historians estimate that over 200,000 people around the world died from famine, disease and cold brought on by the weather anomalies Tambora caused. In China, flooding and failed harvests led to widespread starvation. In India, the monsoon failed and cholera spread like wildfire. In the United States, thousands of families abandoned their land and migrated west, thinking God had cursed their farms. And all of it, every inch of this suffering, was caused by a single mountain. But even in this darkness, there were strange side effects that changed the world in unexpected ways. In 1816, Lord Byron and his friends, including a young woman named Mary Shelley, spent the unusually cold and stormy summer confined indoors at Lake Geneva. To pass the time, they held a contest to write horror stories. It was there, trapped by the volcanic weather, that Mary Shelley began drafting her legendary novel, Frankenstein. Some of J.M.W. Turner's most haunting paintings of red skies were inspired by the strange sunsets caused by volcanic aerosols. Even the Great Migration patterns in the United States were partly sparked by Tambora, and hundreds of thousands of Americans left the devastated Northeast and moved westward in search of better land. And yet, this story is barely remembered. It's not taught widely, it's not dramatized in textbooks or films. Ask most people today about the greatest disasters in history, and Tambora doesn't make the list, but it should. It was a moment where the Earth flexed its power and reminded humanity that it doesn't take a war, a plague, or a bomb to unravel civilization. Sometimes it only takes a single mountain. But here's the terrifying part. Tambora was a VI7 eruption. That's the second highest category on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. The last VI8 eruption? That was the Toba supervolcano, also in Indonesia over 70,000 years ago. Scientists believe it nearly wiped out humanity. And guess what? We're overdue. Yellowstone in the US is a supervolcano, so is Campi Flegrei near Naples. If even one of them erupts on the scale of Tambora or worse, the global consequences would be immediate. Supply chains would collapse, global temperatures would drop, agriculture would fail, and this time we're even more interconnected and more vulnerable than we were in 1815. Mount Tambora is more than a story about a volcano. It's a story about how fragile our systems really are. How one event, one eruption, one plume of ash can throw the entire planet into crisis. It's about how history hides the most important truths in silence, in forgotten footnotes, in places we don't expect. Most people think history is about kings, wars, and dates, but sometimes it's about the Earth itself, reminding us who's really in charge. If this story made you feel like the world is more interconnected and more fragile than you thought, you're not alone. Hit that like button so more people discover this forgotten history. Subscribe us for more untold events and chilling realities buried in the past. And comment below, did you know about the year without a summer? What would happen if it happened again? History isn't just about what happened, it's about what could happen again.